In this clip, Eve Bunting's book, The Terrible Things, is read aloud to begin a dialogue about what might happen when people who have voices don't use them. So this book is about voice not used. Let's watch this clip about The Terrible Things. It's a read-aloud story.
Our learning intention is looking for the main message and the techniques that these authors and illustrators use to get that message across. So we're going to continue with that today and of course relate that to our big idea in the room, the missing voices. We're going to view a picture book. You each have 2 sticky notes. So on one of the stickies, I'd like you to write down what you believe the main message of the story is. On the second sticky note, what I'd like you to do is write down the techniques that the author and illustrator use to get that message across, things that are effective. And keep in mind how it relates to our big idea. Have a look at the cover. The title is The Terrible Things. And I just want to hear your thoughts based on the imagery here and the title, what you think this will be about and how it might relate to our big idea. Okay, Dan?
You can see that there's a small white rabbit in the front of the picture, and there's some sort of dark and mysterious form there. Like, you don't know yet, but I'm guessing it's the terrible things, just by inferring. And also, you can think, like, going back to, like, our world, maybe you can compare it to some terrible problem we're having in our world.
Keep in mind, again, as you're working through this, main message, author's message, the techniques that the author and illustrator use to get that message across, and if those techniques are effective in building a message. The clearing in the woods was home to the small forest creatures. The birds and the squirrels shared the trees, the rabbits and the porcupines shared the shade beneath the trees, and the frogs and the fish shared the cool brown waters of the forest pond. They were content, until the day the terrible things came. Little Rabbit saw their terrible shadows before he saw them. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, and their shadows blotted out the sun. "We have come for every creature with feathers on its back," the terrible things thundered. The little fish leaped from the water to show the shine of their scales, but the birds twittered nervously in the tops of their trees. Feathers! They rose in the air, then screamed away into the blue of the sky. But the terrible things had brought their terrible nets, and they flung them high and caught the birds and carried them away. The other forest creatures talked nervously among themselves. "Those birds were always too noisy," old Porcupine said. "Good riddance, I say." "There's more room in the trees now," the squirrel said. "Why did the terrible things want the birds?" Little Rabbit asked. "What's wrong with feathers?" "We mustn't ask," Big Rabbit said. "The terrible things don't need a reason. Just be glad it wasn't us they wanted." As day followed peaceful day, Little Rabbit thought Big Rabbit must be right. Until the day the terrible things came back. All but Little Rabbit, who was little enough to hide in a pile of rocks by the pond and smart enough to stay still so that the terrible things thought he was a rock himself. When they had all gone, Little Rabbit crept into the middle of the empty clearing. "I should have tried to help the other rabbits," he thought. "If only we creatures had stuck together, it could have been different." Sadly, Little Rabbit left the clearing. He'd go tell other forest creatures about the terrible things. He hoped someone would listen.
One thing I noticed was that we were informed about the learning intention before she started reading it aloud. And this gave us a point where we could focus our thinking and know what the further discussions would be about.
So in this clip, we saw everyone looking at a picture book as it was read aloud. And in grade 8, is that a normal process?
It is a picture book, and some people would say that picture books aren't at our grade level. But when a book like The Terrible Things, it's not only a picture book, that it has several levels of meaning.
So that gives you a common shared experience as a class then, doesn't it, too? Where you can come back to that in other discussions with a nice reference point.
And our big idea doesn't need to be expressed in one way, so not just by reading novels or writing something, but also by picture books, because in picture books there are pictures, and the saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words, so everybody can interpret it in a different meaning, but we're still focusing on the same big idea.
And these stick-it notes, are they useful?
I would say so, because there are a lot of people who need that extra minute or 2 minutes to write down their thoughts and be able to express them in deeper levels. There are some people in the class who are able to get their ideas in a snap, but there are others who need that time to get up in there and sort their thoughts out and then be able to join the conversation other than certain people raising their hands every single time.
And which are you?
I have my occasional times of when I am able to think quick on my feet, but on certain levels, I still need that extra second to sort out my thoughts and get my hand up a little later.
And also when you have your ideas in mind and you prepare to share in a whole group, you're all accountable to talk.
That's interesting. It builds community too, doesn't it? Did you like the book?
Yes, I did, because it was simple and everyone could understand it and everyone could relate to it, but you could bring so much more out of it if you wanted to.
Were you shocked at how much there was in a picture book?
Yeah. It was up to you, though, to decide if you wanted to make it something three-dimensional and something important and like widespread, or something simple.
And what about this bit about people not saying what they could say when there's trouble? Does that make sense to you?
There are times in everyone's lives where they feel silence because either they feel too intimidated or that they just don't believe that what they're thinking inside that they want to say will come out wrong and won't be as effective or have an effect on them. So there are many times where, even for us, where we wanted to say something but we weren't able to say it for certain reasons.
And relating it to the real world, it's a lot like a situation when you're being bullied. So when the terrible things came, it's kind of like the bully, and you don't want to stand up for yourself because you're afraid that you're going to get hurt even more. So even though the little rabbit kept asking, why are they taking other people and like what's going on here, we still feel intimidated not to say anything because we're afraid that the terrible things will come back to us.
Yeah, when you can connect it to yourself, the actual information becomes more worthwhile and like you want to listen to it. Like just as a student, if it's not relating to you, then it's not as interesting, it's not going to affect you deeply.
So one of the ways of engaging young adolescents would be to use effective texts that grab you, right?